These are tough times. Everybody's struggling, including literary festivals and writers and artists of all kinds. Please donate to the Hay Festival at its website, hayfestival.com, to help secure its future. Thank you. See you there.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dylan Jones. I'm chairman of the Hay, and I'd just like to welcome you to our final event of the day. And I'd like to thank you for all your patronage in the last week. This year's Hay Festival is a very different experience from convening in a tent in the Wye Valley. But the event put on in the last week have generated such extraordinary viewing figures, and so I thank you for your passion and your interest, and the fact that we've been able to deliver such amazing content for you in the last week. Thanks also to the brilliant Hay team who have managed to deliver an event at such quality, and also finally to our brilliant artists who have streamed in from all around the world to be at the Hay Festival in 2020. Not the full we thought we'd be having, but it showed us all a new direction, a way that possibly we can convene with you all on a bigger scale in future. Tonight, our final event of the day is with the brilliant Tori Amos, and Tori, thank you for joining us this evening. There she is. Hello, welcome.
Hi, Dylan. It's good to see you.
How are you?
I'm quite emotional being here. This is my first time at the Hay Festival, and it makes sense that it would be an audio, a sonic experience, I guess, being a musician. But it's quite emotional to be part of it.
Well, thank you very much for joining us tonight. You're joining us from Cornwall, is this right?
Yes, we're here at the recording studio in North Cornwall.
And how has lockdown been for you?
Well, we're a full house. So we have two teenagers, our daughter and her boyfriend. And we've all been together since early March. So it's quite something. I'm grateful to be in Cornwall. Cornwall is beautiful right now. You were telling me it's beautiful in Wales. And
it is.
And to be here, I'm in the machine, the hospital where instruments are fixed. So if I'm going to be anywhere, it's good that I'm around an instrument.
Now, you've lived in Cornwall for quite some time?
Since 1997.
Wow.
I split time between here and the States, but I had been in the States for a while seeing my family. So I was coming back to be with my husband and daughter.
Before we start talking about the book, what was it about Cornwall that attracted you?
Well, my husband and I couldn't agree on North London or South London. He's definitely South London, St. Wreatham from Stratham, and I was on the other side of the river pushing for that one, so we couldn't agree. So he just said, "Let's go to Cornwall. It's where I went as a boy. It's where my parents would take me, and it's where my most wonderful memories are." So we decided to get a recording studio, and I'm here in the old barn. It's 300 years old. So
wow, that's some compromise.
Yeah,
not Shepherd's Bush, not West London, not East London, but Cornwall. I love that.
I
Terrific.
know, but it's funny, people used to laugh at us thinking of all the places you could have had a studio in London, but really he has said to me, we'll get more work done if we're in the country. So we're in farm country here. We're surrounded by farms. There are no street lights, but we're lucky we've got fiber here. So we can make records And this is where we've made all the records since 1997.
Wow. Well, your fiber is very good. But let's talk about your book. Your book is called Resistance, and it's a new book that begins, tells the story of you being a teenager, playing piano for the politically powerful in hotel bars during the formative years of the post-Goldwater and then Koch-led libertarian era, and through the Reagan period, and works its way through your years as an artist, living in LA in the 3 decades as one of music's most powerful and courageous voices. Lots of guidance and actionable advice in the book. Fascinating. I'm sort of 2/3 of the way through it at the moment. But first question. So why now? I mean, I know you've done a book and you've collaborated on books before, but why this book and why now?
My editor, Rakesh Sechal, came to me. I was touring and I was in New York City at the Beacon. He came backstage after one of the shows and he said, it's time that you really write about your experience of how you cut your teeth professionally in Washington, that you turned pro at 13, and that after the gay bar gave you your first chance, then you moved into congressional parties and you moved into I called it the liquid handshake. And he knew this story. And he said, after the 2016 election in the United States, I think it's really important that you talk about what you witnessed as a musician and then how that informed you over the next 30, 40 years and the places you've been in and touring during wars, being in New York in 9/11, and being the first guest on David Letterman, the first music guest, and those challenges and the responsibility and what I was witnessing from people going through these collective traumas and how that then informed the music.
What's the liquid handshake?
So the lobbyists would come in and do their deals in the swanky hotels. I started working in the swank early 15. And so I was an old pro by then. I started at 13. My reverend father took me to Georgetown to get a job, and no one would have us. So finally, the last place, a guy had a stud necklace around his neck, and my father, with his clerical collar, his dog collar, said to him, my daughter can play and sing. And the manager said, well, if she's any good, she can play for tips. And then I went in there and saw that there were all men, and they were staring at my father, and they said, is he in a costume? And I said, no, that's not a costume. He's really a minister. So then they decided to help us. And that was the beginning of my professional life. But it moved on to the more political as I got a little bit older.
Must have been a fascinating period for someone so young, 13, 14, being in establishments that serve alcohol. And I mean, the UK licensing laws are slightly more liberal than they are in North America, but I mean, you're not allowed to drink until you're 21 in the States. So how did that square with you being a young woman playing piano in places where they served alcohol?
Well, there are two things there. My parents were chaperoning me, my father in his minister's outfit, when I was 13 and 14. And by the time I was 15, they weren't keen on chaperones anymore in the hotels. But they also wanted a piano player who had the repertoire. And I had a few songs, I don't know, 12 to 1,500 of all styles that I could play. And I would audition, and I would always be the final two in an audition. And so I would be able to play classical music for the dinner hour. I could play show tunes for people who wanted to sing along, or I could do Led Zeppelin, and you didn't even know it was Zepp because you might think it was something classical, so that I could slip it in there, Dylan, you know, because I was a huge Led Zepp fan. But that was
Quite
devil
right,
music.
too.
So I had to, be, but I knew the repertoire, so I was able to get the jobs. And the gays had taught me deportment and how to, put my hair up and dress. And we were in the district, see, so we weren't under state law. The district, DC is not a state. So they just didn't have a law for this in 1976. They just didn't. So therefore, I was able to be there during that pivotal presidential election with Ronald Reagan running against Jimmy Carter. And on the Libertarian ticket, really important here, the vice president running was one of the Koch brothers, who then really changed the political landscape in America for the next and are today, and set up, Citizens United, which in 2010 changed everything for us, the ruling by the courts. So that's something people can really dive into and look at that history. But they were all there when I was a teenager playing and running for president in 1980.
So were you politicized from a relatively young age?
You couldn't be in the inner loop of the Beltway, as they called it, and going to school without being aware of what was happening. People used to say it might not be happening in discussion outside of Washington, especially before the internet, but it was definitely happening inside the inner loop of the Beltway. And so playing 5 nights a week, I would play at weekends until I was 15, but at 15, I was playing happy hour, Monday through Friday, going to school still as well, of course. And it was very different. What I was learning there was different than they were teaching me how government ran in high school. And that's where I learned about how the lobbyists worked and how deals were made and how they were cut, and they would happen right in front of me. And the gays would explain what was going on.
But what were your aspirations at the time? You were a musician. You were writing songs. You were obviously very ambitious. But what was your goal?
Well, I was coming back from a failure because I'd been kicked out of the conservatory at 11. So my father was really devastated, just devastated. I'd been one of the youngest accepted at 5 and had been playing, and the trajectory was to be a concert pianist. But honestly, I was fascinated with teenagers, so I was 5, watching teenagers listen to this music coming out of the radio, and they would start playing it. And this was, it was revolutionary, seeing they don't want to play the composers that documented their time 200 years ago. No, they want to play the music that's documenting this time now, the civil rights movement, Vietnam War. These social revolutions were powered by music. And so once I saw how they were moved by it, I thought, I'm not an interpreter, not really, not in my bones. I'm a composer. But then I have to figure out what kind of stories I want to tell. And at 5, I'm telling different stories than some of the ones they're listening to. I'm telling stories about animals and, dreams and butterflies and scary people at church. I had songs about them. There were very many scary people at church, and half of them worked on the Hill in Washington.
But who were the people who inspired you? Who were the musicians and the performers and the singers and the songwriters who spurred you on?
Oh, there's so many. Gosh, where do we begin? Nina Simone, the power of her music and her protest. The Beatles, of course, because of the melodies and I even said to somebody at the conservatory, I said, why aren't you all teaching us to analyze the Beatles catalog, the whole catalog? And one of them said, nobody will know who they are in 30 years. And I said, you're freaking out of your mind and you're old and you don't know what you're talking about. Well, I got in big trouble for that. And I understand the tone wasn't respectful, but I was so infuriated by the arrogance that they had, and the how they were so they did look down their noses at the time to most contemporary music except for jazz. So I really
Sure.
found that unacceptable, and I was such a believer in the Beatles and in Joni Mitchell, in Marvin Gaye, that I really went to bat for these amazing musicians and got thrown out. But I wasn't
But where
wrong.
did
We know who the Beatles are.
yeah, I still know who the Beatles are. But where did that confidence come from? Was it confidence in your abilities as a musician? Confidence in your abilities as a songwriter, or confidence simply in the ambition to be successful?
Ever since I was little, I could hear the muses sometimes, and I knew the difference of when I was making something up and when they would gift it. I knew the difference. I always knew. Doesn't mean I can't write something by myself. I'm not saying it's terrible, but sometimes it's not very good. But when they add something and we collaborate, people call it different things. I call them the muses. And I know they exist. And so working with them, serving them, it's humbling, and yet they are they can really push you around sometimes if you're not delivering, but that's okay. That's the agreement. So that was, I don't know, the magic of being able to collaborate with them, and then realizing that, to be in the music business is a very different thing than to be a creator. And the music business, I don't always have the stomach for it, but if you're going to be in it, then you need to know where you stand with your art, and you have to be ready to stand by it. And so that's just been my path. When I chase the commercial path, I fall on my face. And when I listen to the muses and I serve the art, then things work out a little bit better than that.
How old were you when you learnt or understood how to channel the muses?
I was very young, and that was going well. But you see, there is a double-edged sword with trajectories of children and thinking, wow, this kid is talented, but they need to be nurtured and they need room to learn their own style, and not just to fulfill the dreams of the professors or those around them. Because children, when I was 5 going into the Peabody, I understood how the music would come and the magic of that, but I was 5. So emotionally, there were things that I couldn't process yet. But with music, I was being shown beautiful music by Bach. And so that really began to open up my imagination. And I began to study structures and how song structures were built. So that was motivating, and it really, really moved me to my bones.
Mm-hmm. In the current climate, the climate of MeToo and Time's Up, has the narrative of female creativity changed, or the acceptance of female creativity? Has there been a quantum shift?
We've been banging on this door for a long time in all fields about assault and those stories and those wounds. And I think with the MeToo movement, the wall began to shake, really shake, and it needed to. Yet, it's essential that people are putting these boundaries in place when people go back to the workplace, how people treat each other, because sometimes it really is about, no, this isn't okay, and it's a consciousness. People, I think, Dylan, if we're honest about it, because of the Me Too movement, people had to start to clean up their act, whether it was in the film industry or the movie industry or the music industry. And hopefully that will be across all industries, and should be. There should be a mutual respect for each other.
The talking practically now, we've been in a this sort of lockdown period for nearly 3 months. All creative industries are finding it incredibly difficult to find ways out of it, and yet there has been a sort of collective entrepreneurial zeal for connecting with audiences, with patrons, with fans, with people. Lots of people performing on IG, Facebook, many different ways. But can you plot a path out of this? Can you see where the industry, your career is going to be in, say, 9 months' time? I mean, you take someone like Live Nation, who are responsible for the majority of concert performances in the entire world. This year's a write-off. It's there might be some performances at the end of the year, but with all the problems and the complexities of social distancing, it's a huge issue. So how can someone like you, who I would imagine thrives on the relationship with an audience, how is that going to change? And as I say, how are you plotting a sort of chart out of it?
The first is I'm grieving. If most people who can see what's going on, many people, artists, are grieving because they realize I was going to be out in October, and we had to knock that on the head many weeks ago. So once it began to become more clear that this isn't going to be, as people have said, a switch just flips back on, that when you're talking about playing the Albert Hall, one of my favorite places in the world, that's a very different type of conundrum than people putting up plexiglass in a restaurant and trying to make that adjustment. I'm not saying that they're not suffering as well. So it is a complex conundrum. I'm sure you're thinking about it. And, I'm plotting months out from now, months and months and months and months and months out from now. It doesn't mean there won't be music out. I'm working on new music now. But just to reflect and document this time, like many musicians are feeling called to do. But to tour it is a very different reality. And that reality, I don't see happening until people can come together. So that's a ways off.
It seems to be, but I think one of the sort of the strands of hope is that because we've all been in this lockdown, and this lockdown in some respects will continue in various ways for quite some time, that the surge of creativity and the surge of invention and the surge of interaction when we are finally allowed out into the big bad world again, is going to be incredible. And there's going to be so many people who are desperate to perform and play music and act and get in front of audiences again. It's going to be incredibly exciting. Everyone's going to be working. So you can look forward to a time where there is this burst of creativity, which I think is going to be an incredibly positive thing and something that we can all look forward to.
Yes.
Anyway,
But
that
it's
was
but it's making sure we don't get trapped in the despondency of the now, because the now, it's getting from here till autumn of 2021. It's getting from here to 18 months from now. And making sure that the mental side of this, the emotional side of this, that we're caring for each other and that we're understanding what it means. Because for certain arts, you know, their world is wiped off the map right now. And when people are dealing with the physicality of what we're dealing with, that's kind of pushed back unless you're in it. So the artists have to nurture themselves and each other, and I think resist despondency, because that is, to me, one of the real invaders of this virus. It's a side to it whereby we can just not see what you're talking about yet as a reality, because things are not getting locked back in yet.
But the acknowledgement of what's happening is incredibly important, isn't it? And it's incredibly important in terms of how it informs what we do with creative people.
Yes. And that communication, I think, doing things like this, having a virtual Hay Festival, to be able to talk about where we are right now in an honest way. And I know that we'll all be out there playing music again, and the theater will be bursting again. But it's not today, and it's probably not in the next 6 months. So people are having to adjust. And that adjustment, we're in a cataclysm. So we have to create through that. But that's and that is the challenge, to create with it and not be overwhelmed by it.
Now, part of your journey, as you talk about in the book, is growing up through Reagan's America. I mean, even bad presidents do good. And as we're in the re-election year, does Trump have any redeeming qualities whatsoever?
Do you know, that's not for me to say. I would say to you, political journalists are the one to really answer this. I think that what Americans are voting for in the fall is a system of government. And we're either going to vote for a democratic system or more of an authoritarian system, which is the Trump administration. They've shown that. And that's what experts over at Gaslit Nation, the women over there, their podcast, I encourage people to listen to them. Andrea Chalupa and Sarah Kendzior, they're experts on authoritarianism. And so they talked to me about this last week in a podcast. So that's what we're voting for in the United States. So to say, is there anything redeeming about an authoritarian regime? No, I'm not going to say there's anything redeeming, because my ancestors fought and some died for the idea of democracy as a system of government, not authoritarianism.
But you say that political journalists are the people to ask, but all political journalists have a partisan quality about them, even the ones who claim they don't. And increasingly, people, particularly young people, look to creative artists to steer away, particularly in times like this, which are dark times. And as a creative person, and as a successful creative person, you have an incredibly powerful voice, and people look to you for guidance.
And I wrote a book called Resistance, and it clocks the last 50 years of the American story. And it comes from a personal place as being a piano player and playing for some of these guys. And it comes from then my personal artistic trauma, my dark night trying to find my stylistic voice, and then once finding it, having to fight for that. It doesn't just always get given to you. Sometimes you have to say, when you're being rejected and your work is, it's your North Star, you found it, but it doesn't sound commercial to the boys club or the suits. So you have to say, don't touch it. Don't touch this. I'll give you more. But you cannot touch. You can't rip the pianos off the record and insert the record with guitars and mute the pianos. So that was a fight I had to have. I had that fight in 1990. And that's part of my story. So I believe that the book talks about this, and the records, all the records have been, I hope bearing witness. I hope I've been bearing witness since the late 80s. I was doing it as a little girl. Then once I started chasing the commercial machinery side of the music industry, where I lost my soul, but that was something I did. I have to be responsible. I chased that. And so then I had to see that I didn't wear a bustier very well. I didn't wear rock chick very well in that way. I had to find my own kind of punk harpsichord inner creature.
You write about the Reagan administration in your book, but how do you contextualize that period now when you look back upon it?
Well, it was a turning point, and I think what was key for me was that there was a nation that was allergic to war after Vietnam. And yet, Jimmy Carter lost the narrative. And we've seen that happen in the American story, where it's who controls the narrative. And unfortunately, it is a war of ideas there. And so I don't profess to really know about other countries' politics, but this is where I grew up and became a professional in Washington. And I've been playing through many different wars. I was there, the book talks about it, when George W. Bush announced that America was going to war in Afghanistan. And I was playing at the Daughters of the American Revolution Constitution Hall for the second night in a row. And men that were not Tory fans came up to me and were in tears and said, my boy's going to be deployed tonight. And we worked out a song that I could learn or that I knew, and we negotiated. I would play Raining Blood by Slayer. And in that moment, I wasn't the other to them. I wasn't this feminist person that was on the opposite team for them. We were people, and we were living through a crisis, going to war. And the book talks about how in the days after 9/11, America hadn't chosen the narrative of war. They had not. I drove up and down the country in a rock and roll bus. I was there. I saw it. And I saw the truckers. And when they heard we from New York City, they would come and hug us. Now, this was the Deep South. Anybody who knows the Deep South understands what I'm talking about. And they said, you're from New York. We're with you. So the The populace had not decided on violence as the answer. That of all the answers in that moment, it would be violence or the strong arm. Go back to Reagan, though. And when the American hostages hadn't come home in 1980, and that's the election year where one of the Koch brothers was on the Libertarian ticket, Jimmy Carter, Reagan, and then Bush Sr. And then I saw people that I thought I knew that had been against the Vietnam War and didn't want to go to war again. All of a sudden, strong arm, Reagan, kill them over there, get our hostages home, kill them. It was I-rage is what they called it. And I saw people change before my eyes and what they thought they wanted in a leader. Not who the leader really was, but they bought into the narrative that the leader was sowing.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, for many entertainers who write memoirs or autobiographies, they're obviously quite cathartic, often because the nature of their work is not. But your work has always been very intense. It's obviously you we're listening to, you that's pouring your heart and soul into your material. So was the book in any way cathartic? And how do the two disciplines differ, writing and writing a book?
Well, okay, so once I got to the Mary chapters, Mary is my mom who died in May of last year. And I'd been writing the book for a year and a half. And it's the hardest thing I've ever done because I didn't have music as part of my storytelling ingredient, friend. So I was really having to sharpen my pencil and tear up drafts and start again. But then when I turned in the Mary chapters, then my editor called me up and said, good news and bad news, and I think you found the voice for the book. And now you have to rewrite the book. So that's a good editor, right? That is a good editor. So that was a real 10,000 words sometimes in a week, and I had to turn that around. So, but he was right. Once I'd found the voice through Mary's grace, my mother, a lover of books, and without her, I wouldn't have been a songwriter. She was the reason I think I became a songwriter and not just a musician. And so she and my dad are both very much a part of the story and the book.
Can you talk about that? Talk about their inspiration in encouraging you to write?
Well, my father, during this process, in the last year since Mary died, he would tell me, he'd say, Tori Ellen, I want you to talk about failure. And I want you to talk about your two big failures. And I said, I've had more than that. Which ones are you talking about? And he wanted me to talk about getting thrown out of conservatory because I think he was really brokenhearted by that. That kind of changed what was I going to do then. And then when my first album in 1988, Why Can't Tori Read, when I'd gone from being accepted the youngest at the Peabody to bimbo, he couldn't really square that. And I had a hard time squaring that too. And that's why I had to begin to see my intentions as an artist and why you're writing something. And I've run into people, and honestly, some guy said to me, I want fast cars, I want chicks, and I want that life. And I'm like, you might just do it, mate, because that was his intention. But mine was to serve the muses, right? So to serve the muses and to get seduced by that lifestyle, as in the fame, that side of it, which can really be, you know, I've called fame a sadist. It can be quite a tough teacher. And I had to learn that lesson the hard way.
How did you cope with that?
Well, I spent months, I guess, wallowing in my one-room apartment behind the Methodist Church in LA and Hollywood on Franklin and Highland. That's where I lived in 1990. So, yeah, I guess after that record bombed in 88, I had to look in the mirror, and my mother said to me, honestly, dear, it's the best thing that ever happened to you. You never get out of that bustier, honey. And so I didn't find it funny at first. It took me a while, but then I started to find freedom not to try and write what I thought they wanted.
Yeah.
Stopped writing for the music industry, and I started writing what I was seeing and observing and feeling and what people were going through, and people were suffering. And so I felt, okay, I'm going to write about this because I'm feeling it too. And that's when I feel I reclaimed my relationship with the muses again.
Right. Remarkably, it's gone so quickly this evening. We're fast running out of time, but I just want to finish talking about your about how you think it's going to be when we come out of lockdown. How will you have changed if we've been in this weird, surreal situation now for 10 weeks. How will you have changed when we come out of it?
I'm not sure I know that right now. We might have to have a chat in a year if you're free, because
well,
I don't
here.
know.
You have to come back.
I'd love to come back into Wales. I'd love that. But I think we all will have changed, Dylan, in ways we might not know now. Some ways we might know. I'm a better cook than I was when this whole thing started. But also, I think I'm valuing creativity, what it means to be a creative, what is the responsibility, just reaffirming that. And reaffirming the place for artists in our culture and society. And that I think coming out of this, there are going to be discoveries that people have made that have made them feel empowered. And there will also be some scars, wounds that need to be healed. Some relationships won't have made it, as we know. It's just something we're hearing about. Some relationships, some people have become, I think, better friends in working together, how to solve situations. One thing is that how I used to process things by taking a trip, by traveling.
Right.
Traveling was my passion, a pilgrimage. And I'd go write something to the desert, just go somewhere. I love to travel. And so right now, I'm very grateful to be in Cornwall. I'm very grateful. But I'm learning to process in other ways, to go make a potato salad, to go into the kitchen. That's where I'm traveling these days, make a different sandwich. And believe it or not, then I think it through.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's been great talking to you. I have to say, from a personal perspective, even though this whole exercise has been really gratifying in some respects, and the way that we have communicated with people over the last 10 or 12 weeks, it just makes me crave for human company. But it would be
Me
great to
too.
see you next year at the festival. For everyone watching, go and buy Resistance. Go to Waterstones, order it online. It's a tremendous book. It's really rich. Tori, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and hope to see
Thank
you
you.
very, very soon.
Me
Take
too.
care.
Thanks. Thanks,
Bye bye.
everybody. Thanks, Dylan.